Chicago vừa tới với Joe. I told you that I go with you. Trong lòng tiên tất cả nó bằng biển đông. Phía sau, phía đầu tiên của công viên thiên niên kỷ Millennium Park, công viên trung tâm của Chicago. Hôm nay cũng khá nóng, mà dù sao cũng vẫn mát hơn so với mấy tuần trước. Mọi người tới đây chụp hình. Này là một cái đồ án mà vừa làm ở lớp master class, cũng tương tự giống vậy. Mọi người tới đây chơi ở cái ngày nóng này. Cái này có hình chiếu.
To the present. If you'll kind of gather in front, so I'm talking one group. From 1934 until 1957, there was no new high-rise construction here in Chicago in the central business district. We had a depression, we had a war, and we weren't using steel to build buildings. Then in 1955, the Prudential building went up, but it's not in the Loop, it's not in the central business district, it's across Michigan Avenue down at Randolph. 1957, the first skyscraper back in Chicago in the central business district, and that was the Inland Steel building, which we will see on the tour. Now, the buildings that were built at the time were what I will call modernist, international style modernist, the kind of buildings you think of as being associated with Mies van der Rohe and his disciples. Flat top, glass curtain wall, up on stilts, steel framing, generally in a plaza. That style predominated through the 70s, kind of into the 80s, and then we got postmodernism. And I'll talk more about what postmodernism is when we see some of those buildings, but for many people it was a reaction against what they believed to be the sameness of all these glass boxes. Now, have any of you taken the historic tour? Some, okay, this will be a very quick review. Set the background. Here in the late 19th century, what became known as the first Chicago School of Architecture developed. 1885, William Jenny, architect, created, designed the first metal frame skyscraper, where the frame of the building carried its weight, not the walls, not that brick upon brick. The cladding, the windows were hung on it just like a curtain, the term curtain wall. And this was an important innovation because this was before fluorescent lighting, before air conditioning, and it meant you could get more light and air into these buildings when the walls didn't have to be so thick to carry them. The other, as they were developing first the Chicago School of Architecture, they were designing the buildings in three parts, like a column, shaft that is all alike, and then a cap up at the top. That's what first Chicago School buildings were, in three parts. And the architects designing the buildings at that time were very proud of the steel framing. They wanted you to see that framing, so you could see the structure of the building, not covering it over with neoclassic design like the Art Institute, for example. Interestingly, the idea of showing that framing and that form following function reappeared in Europe in the 1920s and 30s as the international style. And it's one of the few times that innovation in architecture and art traveled from America to Europe. Usually it was the other way around.
Well, in Europe?
Germany, the international style that got developed there, had many of the same principles that had been...
Where?
Where? Germany.
Europe.
Primarily. That's where it started. When you look at these buildings, you think volume, you see a glass box. With the others, you thought mass, very heavy and earthbound. All of it, the second is that all of the elements are very regularly applied. These buildings are not symmetrically designed, like, again, say the Art Institute. And third, there is no applied ornamentation or decoration or color on these buildings. The beauty comes from the design itself, from rich materials being used, but not doodads being placed on them. Now, postmodernism has all of these things. It has decoration, it may use color, it mixes architectural styles, and it's very contextual. A postmodern building in Chicago would not work in San Francisco or in London. It takes from its surroundings, London district. Now, when Mies van der Rohe came here in 1938, and we'll talk more about him when we see some of his buildings, he brought that international style with him. And the buildings that came after that, particularly here in Chicago by a firm called SOM, Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, covered the landscape of these buildings. There are political and economic factors that influence how and where buildings get built. One of the political influences in Chicago is a thing called the Plan of 1909. It was done by Daniel Burnham, who was a city planner and an architect. And he emphasized, one of the parts of his plan said that the Chicago lakefront would be forever open, clear, and free of any building obstruction whatsoever. Now, Burnham didn't come up with that originally. Everybody thinks it was his. It was a part of Chicago's history from the year before it became a city. The city council had, or the city fathers had adopted that as a principle, which means that commercial building is west of Michigan. Another political factor are zoning laws. Chicago has had a zoning ordinance that allows developers to build buildings taller than the zones in a particular spot would allow if they provide some amenity to the public, an arcade or a plaza, something like that. And that's important because most of these buildings are speculative office buildings, and so taller is better, you can rent more, make more money from it. A couple of economic influences between the end of the 1940s and early 1980s, Chicago lost about 77% of what we call blue-collar jobs, unskilled labor jobs. The increase then in white-collar jobs, professional jobs, meant there was a great need for more office space. Another economic influence was the energy crisis of the 1970s. Architects began designing buildings using reinforced concrete instead of so much glass and steel because they would be more energy efficient. So we will see examples of all of this on our tour. I call my tour Architecture and Aerobics because I walk very fast. I like to have a lot of time in front of the buildings to talk about them rather than strolling along between them. You've got a lot to see in 2 hours. It's very noisy out in the streets. When we stop, I will be talking about what's behind me, so gather in front. If you can't hear me at some time, wave, let me know. I'll repeat. Okay, ready? And we do go in lobbies where it will be cool, so I'll do that as much as possible. Ready?
Yep.
We're gonna walk. You see. This is our first example. In 1991, the design architect was Tom Beebe of Hammond, Beebe and Babcock. It is the Harold Washington Municipal Library, Chicago's public library, the largest municipal library in the country. And this is typical postmodern. You start at the top, that green triangle, very classical design element. On each corner you see a figure. People who've taken the historic tour don't get the answer. Can you tell what they are from here? What that is? They're called acroterion, but they are owls for wisdom and learning. Behind them are the flames of the Chicago fire. Now those great arched windows that you see are a reflection of some other great arched windows on another building in Chicago down the street, the auditorium building. And the garlands you see between the windows what look like those are made up of squash blossoms and corn and wheat. The Board of Trade here in Chicago. And Tom Beebe says that where those come around and then come down the front of the building, that outlines where a column would be on a classic building. So he's got a lot of colors, he's got lots of references to Chicago, really good postmodern building. We are standing in the Chicago Federal Plaza, designed by Ludwig V. Sanderman. And before I talk about the buildings here, let me talk a little bit about Mies. Mies was the last director of the famous School of Design in Germany, Bauhaus. In Berlin, it was shut down by the government in 1936. 1938, Mies came to Chicago. Now he and others had developed what was then called the international style of architecture. And he brought that with him. He came here to be the director of the School of Architecture and what was then called the Arbor Institute is now the Illinois Institute of Technology on the south side of Chicago. And we owe him a great debt. He brought that international style with him. He trained a generation of architects in that style. But he also designed the IIT campus based on a 12-foot grid, the first time that had ever been done, where all of the buildings would go together on campus. Turned out it didn't all get implemented. Much of it did, and we give tours of some of the most famous buildings down there. But Mies believed in his very clear design principles. He believed in clarity of structure and great sensitivity to the proportions of a building. He thought that architecture should be the purest expression of your own time and epoch. And in order to do that, you should use the most modern of materials, which was steel and glass at the time, and the most modern technology. It was the first to use welded steel for frames. We were not in the arts and crafts movement anymore. It was quite all right to have machine-made parts. And he said that he's very quotable. One of his quotes was that less is more. And what he meant was that by reducing a building to its essence, beauty would come from the design and from the use of materials, correct use of materials. Now, let me turn and you look at the building across the way. This was done in 1964.
No, it's fine.
The three buildings on this plaza are all the Federal Plaza. They are federal courtrooms and offices, except the one span building, which is a post office. And the other three architects, this went up in 1964. The other building was 1974. There was a 10-year gap. Yeah, World War, Vietnam. These are federal buildings. They weren't building new buildings. By then, Mason died. He died in 69. Three Chicago firms, C.F. Murphy, A. Epstein and Sons, and Schmidt Gardner Erickson were responsible for the other two buildings. It's all flat roof, steel frame, glass curtain. Piers extended on this building, and you see a glass enclosed recessed lobby which lightens the building. It is up on stilts, or what they call pilotes, P-I-L-O-T-E-S, and it's on a plaza. Those are the elements. That's what you're used to seeing. The I-beams that you see on the windows are not structural. They are more like sculptural. They have lovely different shadows depending on the time of day on that building, but they are not wholly round. The other thing, I mentioned clarity of structure. The glass curtain wall and the facade, the steel frame, sits outside of the structural pieces that are holding it. We can start at the base and look at one of those pilotes. It goes up into the building. It's a concrete and steel column, but you see that the glass curtain wall is set out apart from it. Can you see that? Yeah. Okay. One of Nice's other, you turn around, here you see the post office, which is a single open space. The roof line of that building matches the lobby ceiling in the two high rises. The pavement the plaza you're standing on, the width of these pavers are the same width as the windows. They also go right into the, but you can see it from here, but it follows into the floor of the lobby. So even though these buildings are separated by a city street, they feel like they're all on a single plaza. Now, behind me is a piece of sculpture done by Calder. It's called Flamingo, and it was installed in 1974. And people have asked, what would Nice have thought, since he doesn't like decoration and art? He would probably have liked it. Those great curves play off the flat black of the buildings, and it's not on his building, so he probably would have quite approved of it. Before I talk about the next building, I want to mention something. As I was walking along, I was asked about the library, why it looks so old for having been built in 1991. It's postmodern. I mean, they call from history. However, if you could have seen the west side of that building, which you can't see from where we were, it's a glass curtain wall. So he's mixed both things, and the reason it's a glass curtain wall is form following function. That's where all the offices are for the library. The rest of it is books, and books don't need light. In fact, you don't want them to have it. So he's mixing two styles. If as I'm walking along, I'm talking to people, and it has to do with architecture, I'll repeat it. Otherwise, I'm just chatting. we step down a bit, you'll get a better view of Sears Tower. Sears Tower was done in 1974 by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Bruce Graham was the design architect, but the real genius was an architectural engineer named Fazlur Khan. And Fazlur Khan figured out how to make a 1,454-foot building stand up. It's one of those numbers I unfortunately have not memorized. 443 meters for people who deal in meters. The best way I can explain it, the best visual I have, is if you have a empty paper towel roll and you stand it up, it's very unsteady. If you bind 9 of those together, that gives it a real base. What holds up this building are 9 75-foot by 75-foot square tubes at the bottom. Those are bound together. They rise up and then are sliced off at different levels. So your base is very sturdy. Other people use the image of a pack of cigarettes. They say that Fazlur Khan and Bruce Graham were having lunch and he went like this with his cigarettes and they went like that and they said, aha. I tend not to think so, but it's again a visual that you can get. Until 2 years ago, this was the tallest building in the world. It is still the highest occupied floor at 110 stories. Steel, framing, aluminum, glass, and as one of the men who worked with Fazlur Khan on building this, one of the engineers, a man named John Sills here in Chicago, says it is built to withstand a sway of about 8 inches from center. Now it doesn't weave in the wind all the time. It can withstand that kind of sway. And it leans 6 inches to the west. They knew it. They didn't correct for 6 inches at the top. Nobody will notice. So
I was told that the water in the toilet sloshes around.
It does. I worked there for 6 years. It does.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
it has 3 basements. I worked across the street from it in 3 years. I ate lunch about the 3rd basement, and it occurred to me, go up to the top of this building. You've only been to the very basement down. But yes, there are things. But you really, it's not like you sway back and forth yourself.
No, but you hear a creak.
You can hear a creak.
Yeah.
I can do that in my high-rise. Okay? We're going to move on down. The best way I can explain it, the best visual I have, is if you have a empty paper towel roll and you stand it up, it's very unsteady. If you bind 9 of those together, that gives it a real base. What holds up this building are 9 75-foot by 75-foot square tubes at the bottom. Those are bound together. They rise up and then are sliced off at different levels. So your base is very sturdy. Other people use the image of a pack of cigarettes. They say that Fazlur Khan and Bruce Graham were having lunch and he went like this with his cigarettes and they went like that and they said, aha. I tend not to think so, but it's again a visual that you can get. Until 2 years ago, this was the tallest building in the world. It is still the highest occupied floor at 110 stories. Steel, framing, aluminum, glass, and as one of the men who worked with Fazlur Khan on building this, one of the engineers, a man named John Sills here in Chicago, says it is built to withstand a sway of about 8 inches from center. Now it doesn't weave in the wind all the time. It can withstand that kind of sway. And it leans 6 inches to the west. They knew it. They didn't correct for 6 inches at the top. Nobody will notice. So
I was told that the water in the toilet sloshes around.
It does. I worked there for 6 years. It does.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
it has 3 basements. I worked across the street from it in 3 years. I ate lunch about the 3rd basement and it occurred to me, go up to the top of this building. You've only been to the very basement down. But yes, there are things. But you really, It's not like you sway back and forth yourself.
No, but you hear a creak.
You can hear a creak.
Yeah.
I can do that in my high rise. Okay, we're going to move on down. We're looking at the building. It's kind of green glass. This is the Inland Steel building, done in 1957.
Wow.
The first building in Chicago, in the Loop that I mentioned, since 1934. First high-rise since 1934. It was designed by, well, it started out being designed by Walter Netsch. He then went off to design the Air Force Academy in Colorado. And this was done by Bruce Graham, again of SOM, Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. It was their first skyscraper in the Loop, and now, of course, they've covered the landscape. Inland Steel had made a lot of money during the war. This was to be their corporate headquarters. And this is an exquisite building. It is modernist in style. It is steel frame. The steel came from Inland Steel. The cladding is stainless steel. Very expensive to do, but it was a subsidiary of Inland, so they could afford that. First time stainless steel had been used as a cladding on a skyscraper in the Loop. Flat top, glass curtain wall, and the piers on this building are pulled out to give them, the piers are the vertical pieces I'm talking about in front, to give them more floor space. They wanted a lot of floor space that was very flexible, and that's one thing that they did to get it. Another thing that they did, if you look just to the east of the building, you see a 25-story tower right to the side of it, with no windows, just stainless steel. That's where all the mechanicals for the building are. The elevators, the heating and air conditioning, the bathrooms, all of that are in that tower. It would not meet building code today because it's so far away from the front offices, but it did that. Again, it's up on, below it is up on stilts, glass enclosed with this lobby, plaza. It's only 19 stories tall, very nicely landed streetscape here. 2 years after it opened, it was named the Chicago Landmark. And it had a lot of firsts. It was the first building to be fully air conditioned. The building in 1934, the field building, had air conditioning only on the first 4 floors. This was fully air conditioned. It was the first building to have underground parking. It was the first building to use this tinted green glass. It was also the first building to have automatic window washing mechanism, which I don't believe they use anymore, but on the mullions that wash the windows. It's one of Chicago's favorite buildings. We're going to cross the street and talk about this building. Next building, it now goes by its address of 55 West Monroe. This was done in 1980 by Helmut Jahn, and now international style. Remember the plaza we stood on at the Federal Plaza? You see what he's done. He's turned it onto a diagonal. Before they renovated, the ceiling lights were on the same diagonal inside. Here you have curves. This is reinforced concrete building, not steel framing. It's white painted aluminum. And I want you to look at the windows. You can see the windows here on the east side. And then as we cross the street, look what happens as we go around the curve and how they look on the north side. And we'll talk about it after we get across the street.
There's a joke about this building.
Which,
it was a Xerox building, right?
Yeah.
That it was built in record time. But they built the first floor and they just copied the rest.
On the north. Any ideas why?
You wouldn't want the light to shine in earlier in the day.
This was 1980. It's energy conservation. It's more light. Yes, it's getting more light from the north where there's less of it and cutting down on the heating as it pours in. This was Helmut Jahn's first major skyscraper. His first major commission and his very first skyscraper. At the time he was working for C.F. Murphy. And so this is C.F. Murphy is the architect, sort of firm of record. But this is the first of three Helmut Jahn buildings we will see. Helmut was born in Germany, trained here, and is one of Chicago's most famous architects. He's done a lot of work overseas. I ever heard of the Sony Center in Berlin. That's his. Many other buildings in Berlin and in Germany and around the world, in China. It does something else. As they get larger around that curve, it emphasizes the curve. And this is how you know this is also a postmodern building. You know, a lot of international style building would not have this curve like that at all. So that's another clue that we're looking at something postmodern. If you want to lean up against something while I talk about the building behind me, and then we're going to go down into this plaza. This is now known as Chase Tower. It was One First National. It was done in 1969. Architecture firm, Chicago firm Perkins and Will. This is an example of form following function. In 1969, One First Nation, we did not have branch banking in Illinois. And by branch banking, I mean lots of places where you could go. If you banked in First National, you came to First National. And the 10,000 people a day came through here. So they wanted very large banking floors on the first two floors. Above that were going to be offices. So it could be much smaller, they could be smaller. So people would come in, they could just get in an elevator and go to their office. They wouldn't have to walk through the bank. Because at each end, again, they now have a tower that has elevators. And all those towers also support wind bracing on this extremely tall building. When you look at it, it sort of looks like it swoops up. And later, I will put you in a place to get a terrific photo if you don't get dizzy. If you've got vertigo, you won't do this. But this is an optical illusion. From 1 to 5, it is a straight line tangent. From 5 to 42, it curves inward. 42 to 60, it goes straight up. And after we see the plaza and leave, go up against the corner and look up and you get a terrific view. This is Texas granite cladding on this building. It is not stainless steel, it's the one across the street. The window mullions are bronze for a reason. You know, the mullions on a window that I'm talking about. And the pieces beneath the windows, the spandrels, the horizontal pieces, are recessed. See how they're set back? Again, that makes it even taller, look even taller. Great verticality in this building. It is still Miesian, but it's beginning to move just a little with these curves. We're going to go down into this plaza. We're going to see 3 plazas on the tour. We saw the federal one. It's not very people-friendly. There's 2 benches to sit on. But it is, after all, the federal government, and people go there to protest. It's a great place for protests. This is a little friendlier plaza. It's down, sunken up off the busy street. Let's go down and look at it. Peek over here, you see a fountain. People do come here and sit outside, have lunch, away from the noise of the street. And that fountain, even though it's like at the end of this walkway that is going around and around, that's a wind sensor. If the fountain is shooting out high, and the First National Bank is here, it was built in 1896, designed by Daniel Burnham, and the developers knew they were going to keep that clock against the bronze behind the fountain. The bank is very down. they did this plaza. The centerpiece, of course, is the Chicago.
Office building Tony worked on it.
Before we look here, 1957, glass, stainless steel, 70% of the facade of that building is glass. 11 years later, 69, you get granite cladding, some curves to it. 11 years later, you've got reinforced concrete, not steel. Postmodern. So you see in about a 20-year time frame, some very interesting development. Behind us, across from here, is our newest building. Opened in 2005. And it goes by its address of 1 South Dearborn. It was done by Stefano and Keating, 2 architects who came together in a partnership just for this building. And it is a curious mix of both postmodern and modernism. First, the modernism. It is steel frame, glass curtain wall, it has a plaza, it has elegant materials, glass, granite, and marble. It has no decoration. All of the beauty comes from those materials. However, it also has postmodern elements, which we'll see better if we move down. So it is set back on a plaza, so it exposes the north side of Inland Steel. There was a building right up against Inland Steel. You've never been able to see this side of it before. But kind of paying homage to this very iconic building, they moved the building, their building back, so you can see that. Another thing they did, in the front of, do you know how I'm talking about when I talk about a bay, the division between piers along the building? Look here at the front of this building. And you go up 19 stories. And you see how those spandrels, the horizontal pieces, and the vertical pieces, piers, on these 3 bays are thinner than they are for the rest of the building. You see the difference? That outlines the 19 stories of the Inland Steel building. They are paying homage to that. Both of those men worked at SOM and had offices on the north side of the building at one point. And at least one of them did Keating. I'm not sure about the Stefano. So they are, again, it's contextual. It's what's going on right around that they're paying attention to. This building is about light and glass. You see the green translucent glass, and then right above the entryway, it's clear glass. Above that is a piece of what is called Sponda G marble from Italy, which is backlit. I'm talking about this kind of what looks like white right now. It's backlit at night, so it glows. It's very golden looking. And then clarity of structure. You look, you see that slanting piece cut away up at the top. Light flows in there into a conference room. The other side, it hides some of the mechanical elements of the building. It is on a plaza. It's about a half an acre. It is lined with the plaza has 3 different kinds of granite on it. It's got these 40-foot sugar maple trees, benches for people to sit. And if you look in the lobby, at the end you see a glass, what looks like wavy glass. It's a piece of art by a Canadian artist named Michael Lyle. And in the corners, I don't know if you can see, if you stand on your toes, we can't get over it. In the corners there are piles of recycled glass or glass rods, and they are lit from underneath at night. So all of this is about light. The other inside, if you kind of stand and almost see. The other important thing about this building is one of the greenest, most environmentally friendly buildings in Chicago. Our mayor is convinced and is committed to having energy efficient buildings. This has a LEED silver designation. Excuse me. LEED means leadership in energy and environmental design. They're the U.S. Green Building Commission. Some of the things that make this so environmentally good, first of all, there's a system whereby 50 to 60% of the water that is needed for the trees comes from rainwater capture and being recycled. The electrical systems, all of the energy systems inside use about 10% less energy than any other buildings its size. Housekeeping, the cleaning products, and the cleaning methods are all environmentally friendly and non-toxic. The kitchens and the bathrooms all have low flow appliances, so they've made quite an effort, and that's happening in almost all the new buildings. The major tenant in this is Sidley Austin, a law firm. So, we're going to go into this building, see another piece of art, but I just want to point out this was done by SOM in 1980 by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Most people have moved away. I'm starting to go into postmodern by now. SOM is still holding on to the international style, more or less. The difference here a little bit, you see these sawtooth corners on the building. That allows for 9 corner offices per floor, which makes corporate America pretty happy. And it is 57 stories tall. It's called pre-First National. This was one First National. It's about 3 stories shorter than one First, so they didn't block one First National's boardroom across the street. This is carnelian granite cladding on this steel frame building. And when we go inside, you couldn't have 2 different branches of the same bank, and that made it one bank. Now that that law is no longer in place, they took the walkway down a couple of years ago. Let's cross the street and go into that lobby. I said when we started that the zoning laws allowed you to build taller if you provided a public amenity like a plaza or an arcade. This is just a plaza moved indoors. They probably got zoning bonus points for this. This is an it is an outdoor restaurant. There is sculpture of Henry Moore, large internal, external upright form. Here you get a better view of those bay windows and those offices that are corner windows all the way up. All of this elaborate structure, beams holding this, some are structural, some are not. Some are purely decorative. Does it remind you of anything you've seen in Paris? The boulder?
Oh, well, the pipes outside.
Yeah, Pompidou. Sure, it's a Pompidou Center. Yeah, that's what it reminds me of. I was going to mention very briefly, as I say, we see a lot of sculpture, a lot of art by very well-known artists and artists on this tour. Chicago was one of the first, if not the first city, to require a certain percentage of the developers, and for public buildings, 1% of their budget to be applied to public art.
Oh.
And that's why we have so much that is so good
Yeah,
all over the city. So, and we will see more. Now, do you know about the underground walkway that we have in Chicago?
Not
Where you
yet.
can get from building to building. It's not, it wasn't built all at once, so it doesn't lead everywhere. But it is useful, and we're going to go down the stairs, walk in the underground headway, just a very brief bit, and come up inside one of the next buildings I'm going to talk about. Because when we then go into that lobby, it is a construction style called a tube within a tube, and you will see when I'm talking about what that inner tube is. So from here you can get into the subway system, you can get into City Hall, into the Daily Center, all underground. I bring people here in the wintertime because it gets us out of the winter, in the summer because it's usually more air conditioned than it feels right now. And if you haven't seen it, it's just kind of fun. So we're going to go up here and go up an escalator, and then we're going to go out the building. But as we walk by, notice the elevator core, travertine. That is the inner core that is part of the support structure for one of the next buildings I'll talk about.